I kind of liked what you were saying. I always find
Okay.
that right before, and I've said this before, right before I press record is always somebody says the coolest thing. I go, that's a really good point. We should pick up on that. Uh, let's talk about that again. Let's talk about
Can we talk about that
invoicing
again?
people because it's really really rough. Um, anyway, so how have you been, man?
Yeah, I've been pretty good. Been out doing my own thing since November last year when I had that chance to, take a redundancy
Hmm.
package and give it a nudge. And it's gone all right. Hasn't gone probably as well as
Hmm.
I would have liked in
Well,
my imagination.
imaginations are always fun, aren't they?
But like it's been pretty good
Yeah.
learning, mate. And you wouldn't know unless you tried, right? So for me, it's one of those things. I was like, how often is an opportunity like that going to come around where you get given a bit of a runway financially to actually give it a nudge? So here I am, what, 7, 8 months later, and
Well, that's
I'm
that's
still paying
important.
my bills. But by the same token, it's going to be, yeah, it's one of those things where I'm actually looking, for a more substantive role just to be able to make sure that going forward, because I can foresee and forecast that actually how things are,
Hmm.
it's not going to be enough to carry on. So by all intents, and I talked about this on my podcast on the second to last one on 99. I was like, I failed, but by the same token, it's like, well, yeah, but it was still worth a nudge. And there are aspects that I've done better than I thought I would, and aspects where I've probably not been able to pick up as much as I can. And then, everyone's like, oh, it's the economic climate. And I'm like, yeah, I know that has an impact, but still, I knew that when I started it, right? It's not like I was going into this booming economy to try and take
Well,
some of it.
yeah, there's that. So talk us through it a bit. Like, probably an interesting one, and I should mention that your podcast that you've been running for the last couple of years is called the Stronger Dads Collective. All right, I was going to
Stronger
butcher
Dads
that.
Collective podcast.
I'm glad I didn't. So Stronger Dads Collective. I thought it was awesome. I thought it was a really great idea, and uh, some really cool conversations came out of it. Um, so talk me
Mm.
through the podcast and the redundancy, and then starting your own business and all those kind of things, because it's kind of if you've been following along, it's actually really kind of intricate, and it's a cool story, like you are.
Mm. Mm. Where do
Yeah,
you want me
that's
to
always the
start,
hard
man?
bit. Let's go back to the podcast. Like, what was the genesis of the
Yeah.
podcast? Like, what was the why?
So when would have that been? It's been about 2.5
Yeah.
years. So it would have been the start of 2023 that I recorded the first episode for that one. And how old would have Harvey been then? About 1.5. So I had about an 18-month-old, and I guess I was just in the throes of fatherhood and trying to kind of make sense of it all and how you can still chase and pursue some of your own goals and ambitions that, predominantly in the sphere that I'm in, those are, athletic goals, but there are many other aspects to that and to any individual. But that was kind of my thing, right? Like, how can we ensure that when you might be in a busy season of life, a stressful season of life, a tough season of life, that you kind of can keep on doing something for you and can keep on looking out for your health, wellness, well-being, and using the podcast really to show examples of fathers that are out there doing that. The the main reason from my perspective that I did it was really to try and get some learnings for myself, but also to be able to share those things with other people and let other people follow along. And the idea was that it build a bit of a community. That's why I called it a collective, right? Was so that people, it's not just me preaching this message. It's actually trying to bring people in to be part of it, so the guests are part of that, and then the people listening are part of that. And so that was kind of the ambition. I don't know how really well the big, community aspect of that went, but the intent behind it was kind of that focus. And really, yeah, I mean, the tagline, helping fathers become stronger versions of themselves as people, fathers, and in their athletic pursuit. So that was the whole idea behind it. And so I just started having conversations with people that I knew that were doing cool stuff, and people that I had relationships with in the past and knew from, whether that be weightlifting, powerlifting, science, like whatever kind of field that I've been in, dragging a few of those people in, and a few people that I had never met before from overseas. There's a bunch of these dad pages. When you kind of start looking, you find all these people, and seeing some of the cool stuff some of them were doing, getting them on to chat through what they're up to and what they're trying to achieve with what they're up to, and kind of, built some pretty cool relationships with a bunch of people in, America, Canada, UK, all these places that otherwise I probably would have never known these guys. And now I'm kind of following along with their journeys on, social media, and I've coached some of them, and, it's been a pretty cool process, really. And it's been enjoyable. And as I mentioned before, like I did that 99th one, and then I sort of thought, right, I'm either going to carry on doing this all the time, or I'm going to have to take a pivot and actually try and, move along somewhere else. And I sort of thought, well, 100 is a nice round number, like 100 proper episode. That's a good round number. That's a good one to hit. So I did the 100th one, and then I've kind of made that call that, hey, while I'm starting to kind of look for what is next in terms of career or income side, that it's probably best to not be juggling too many things all at once, and to kind of think, well, okay, what is a logical thing that I can not take off my plate, so to speak, but, to reduce the burden, that once I get a more substantive role again, whether that be full-time or 0.8, 0.6, whatever it might be, to not be overcommitted. So that was kind of like, well, I've hit 100. That's a nice round number. Like, what's the end goal here? Is it just keep on going, or is there, So I've hit pause or stop, whichever you want to kind of think of. Whether I come back to it at some stage or not, I'm not too sure. But yeah, that was a pretty cool experience, and just getting to chat to a whole bunch of people, because around about, I think when I went back and checked, it was a roughly 65, so 2/3 of those episodes were with guests. So that's a lot of conversations, with a lot of different people. As I said, from sports scientists to coaches to everyday dads, kind of just a massive mixture of different people, and kind of seeing some of many of the commonalities that everyone has, regardless of the things they're pursuing. There's a whole bunch of similarities, and there's a whole bunch of similar stresses and issues and kind of things that people have to work out. So to kind of hear how other people have done that was a really...
Well, let's dig into that a little bit, though, because you said you went into it a lot for you trying to learn. Can you define precisely what you were trying to set out to learn, or was it more of a kind of a big picture thing?
Probably more of a big picture and perspective type thing, because I think, oh, my dog's crying at the door, because I think when you've got a little kid, you get really absorbed in your world, because like everything that you're doing essentially outside of work or wherever it is you're going during the day, if you're going somewhere else, then focuses and comes back to the child. And so you don't get a whole lot of ability to kind of expand your perspective and see how other people do this thing. Like, you bump into some parents at daycare, you'll see, you might have a surface level conversation, but you often don't get to actually dive deep into some of the things around. So, if it's a training related thing, well, how do you fit that in your life? Like, what are your goals now? How has that changed since you've done it? Because I think you kind of go through a little bit of an identity crisis almost. I don't know if that's the right term, but, that whole thing of your life becomes less about you.
Yeah, I remember talking to you about this when I was a guest. It becomes
a whole lot less about you.
Yeah, you're now
and
I was going to say you're now the you're the NPC in somebody else's story. Like it's like you're really important part of their story, but it's now someone else's story is the main story.
Yeah, 100%. And like I've found that really, like initially it was kind of weird, right? Because I've always chased athletic goals. I've always had these things that you kind of have to dedicate a decent chunk of time to. And it's not that you can't do that when you're parenting. Like you can still chase big ambitious goals, and people do. We see that every day, right? But the way that you do it changes, and trying to find ways that you can kind of almost put some boundaries around that, so that when you're doing that thing, you're doing it in such a way that it actually can enhance those things, not draw away from them, and there's always going to be a little bit of sacrifice and a little bit of give and take. And I remember one of the guests that I had on, he talked about how it's not you that makes a sacrifice, for you to chase these athletic goals. It's actually your family. It's your wife picking up the slack while you go and train. It's all of these other things. And you're not sacrificing. You're chasing this goal that you want to chase, but they are making that sacrifice that enables you to chase this thing. And so, some of those sort of perspectives that got just discussed and talked about, and you kind of realize, there's a lot of commonalities, regardless of if you're chasing an athletic goal, a scientific one, whatever it might be. Like, and it just becomes a different way of, it's a different dilemma.
What would you say
some
some of those main points are, the main commonalities? Because I figured you've done, what you said, you've done 65 interviews now. We get to actually call you an expert on this. Like, that's, I don't know, like what would the power number be for research on this one?
I still feel like an amateur, mate. I need to go get all the transcripts, man, and get an AI to figure it out for me, because some of them were 2 years ago. But I like, for me, a lot of it, because a lot of the conversations have been around, athletic goals or self-development type scenarios and how that can happen. But then also there's been that really big lens on how to be a better dad, and there's a whole bunch of different things within that. And one of the big sort of things that, probably one of the things that's like so obvious but so hard to do at times, and early on I had a whole bunch of guests talking to me basically saying the same thing, that hey, one of the pieces of advice that I have is take a breath, stop, take a moment, because there are always going to be times in fatherhood where you get tested, you get challenged, and you can choose to react, or you can choose to respond. And so that was probably one of the big lessons that always kept coming up, was finding a strategy or a way that you actually can just pause, take a breath, and then respond in that situation, rather than just being fired up about something. And I have a little bit of a ability, you wind me over the edge, man. Like, so like whenever I hear that, I'm always like, right, Hayden, deep breath. Like, you hear the kids doing something you don't want them to do, you've told them 100 times or whatever. It's like, right, you've got to remember. And then the other part, is they're still like learning, and how you respond is also what they learn to be the way to respond. So that whole aspect of, actually, if I model that, hey, this is challenging and this is tough for me, I'm going to take a breath, I'm going to think about it, and then I'm going to, respond to you and talk to you about this thing, or try and solve whatever the problem is. Obviously, there's situations where you have to intervene immediately. But then there's those other times where actually it's, you're much wiser to just take a breath, think about it, think rationally, remember that, hey, this is a 4-year-old, this is an 18-month-old, they're still learning, you're still learning how to do this dad thing. Like, how can I respond in a way that I would be proud of when I look back at that, and that would actually teach my kid that, hey, if they're in this situation, how can we approach this?
Do you have any worked examples of that? Because I'm thinking, for me, I used to, I remember with my eldest daughter, she must have been 3.5. That, and 3.5-year-olds or 3-year-olds get really argumentative. It's like, oh wow, you think you're in charge now? Yeah. Okay, cool. This is fun. This is going to be interesting. And I remember one day we were arguing back and forth about something. Like, I don't remember what we were arguing about. It would have been probably shoes, whether she should have cheese and crackers for afternoon tea, something ridiculous. And I remember mid-argument stopping in my head and going, "Holy crap! I'm arguing with a 3.5-year-old. What am I doing?" And literally at that point, just stop, take a breath, find something funny in there, because
but it is often those real stupid things that are so meaningless in the scheme of things. And Ryan Halliday, not sure how you pronounce the last name, he has a book called The Daily Dad, and it's just so funny. Like, so often in there, he kind of like shares those stories about perspective, and about, hey, you're arguing over like them not finishing their peas tonight or whatever it might be. And, of the grand right. scheme of things, like, how much does that really matter? This thing that you're making into such a big deal with them. And then they look back and that tars their day, it tars your day. And it was all about this one little thing that didn't, like, in the scheme of things, it doesn't matter that much if they eat the last 2 peas, like, it's not going to make that big a difference. But you kind of have this, I don't know, it's almost that inbuilt thing of like, well, I'm the adult, I'm right here, you need to do this thing. And it's like, well, actually, who does that serve? Like, aside from your ego, who does that really serve? Like, it doesn't really, I don't know, your kid doesn't learn a whole lot from that. And then also, why do they have to finish their entire meal? Like, where does that come from? Is that just because that's what you got told as a kid? Like, and so sometimes there's that little bit of like introspection around, why am I actually wanting them to do this thing? Like, why is this so important to me that it's done this way, or whatever it is? And so for me, like I'm pretty good at letting things go, but sometimes I definitely notice that piece of me that wants to win the argument or wants to be right. And then you're like, Hayden, as you said, like you're having an argument with a 4-year-old about, something that doesn't, like odd socks or something, that say like, who cares, man? Like it really means nothing. They can still wear their shoes.
There's so many like that. I think, you can take that broader as well into just about anything that we're doing, and then start applying the same logic and going, I'm yelling at a car that I've never met and never going to meet again. Right. Okay. Or I'm creating a fantasy about why the barista messed up my order. Like, what am I doing? Just stop.
Like the world scheming against you in particular. In the middle of nowhere,
which of course is how the universe works. It just conspires against me and lets give everybody else a free ride.
It's the only perspective.
I love that. I love what you said about perspective. And now you've got all of these, 65 other perspectives of what goes into good parenting or good fatherhood. Was there anything out of any of those lessons that really kind of caught you off guard or thought, I've never thought about it from that perspective before?
Not necessarily like something that caught me off guard, but one of the things that someone said in one of the episodes was along the lines of like, always take a child on you to do a chore. And like, I was like, what? And then he's like, well, if you're going to the dump, like make one of the kids come with you. Don't just go on your own. Like take one of them, let them be bored, let them come and like see what it's actually like to be a grown up and do grown up things. Like don't just leave them at home to play because you don't think they'll be interested, because sometimes they will be. And it was not long after I heard that thing. It wasn't a chore, but I was taking the dog on a walk at nighttime and it was cold, and I just went, Harvey's not going to want to come. It's too cold. And then I said, I'll just, like, I thought back to them. I thought, I'll just ask him. And so I was like, Harvey, do you want to come on this walk with the dog? It's pretty cold out, but do you want to, would you like to tag along? Yeah, I'd love to come, Dad. And like, this thing of taking the dog for a walk, it would have been, I don't know, it was dark, the stars were out, and, you got to have some conversations with him. I don't even think he rode his bike. I think he actually walked beside me for that walk. And it was like, we got to look at stars. We've never seen stars together, all of those sorts of things that if I had just done my thing and said, right, I'm just going to do this thing because I want to get it done quickly, I would have missed the opportunity to actually have the time with my child. And so that is something I've kind of thought about, is if I'm going to do any sort of job now, like I often do consider like, okay, I haven't, like, my kid's not going to necessarily learn anything from doing this, but they'll get the time with you. They'll get to see what it's actually like to be an adult. And they'll get to be involved with you doing something like that may be practical, or maybe, involves, having to, I don't know, see something that they haven't seen before, observe something with you that they haven't observed before. And, that other part of that boredom, they have to sit in the back of the car with you while you drive to the dump or whatever it might be. And it's like, well, actually, there's a whole bunch of stuff within that if you just leave them at home to, play with their blocks or whatever it is, they don't get that experience, but then you don't get that fatherhood experience, and they don't get to learn some of the intricacies of, well, what is going shopping like? What is this like? I'm sure it'd be easier without them half the time, but actually taking them with you and getting them involved, like they learn from that and you learn from that, and you get to have some experiences that you may not otherwise have. So that was one of the things that I often think back to now, and has kind of become a little bit of a mantra or something I think about, is how can I actually involve the kids in some of the stuff that might be adult, things that you're going and doing something, but there's value.
Yeah, incredibly valuable. So, think back to your own childhood doing stuff like that with your dad. Like as soon as you said going to the dump, I've gone, oh man, that used to be so much fun. I imagine it would have been boring a lot. And I imagine there was lots of sitting around. I don't remember any of those times. I do remember finding weird stuff when you'd go and sift through other people's rubbish. I remember the smells. I remember riding in the back of the trailer illegally because it was the early 80s. You're allowed to do that back then. But you're right. Like those memories, they were fun. And I'm sure it took Dad twice as long to go to the dump and back with me and my brother in tow than what I would have done on his own. So,
well, yeah, now that you say that, like I think back to some of the stuff that happened in my childhood, and my granddad owned a joinery. And so he'd always be, delivering windows, doors, kitchens, whatever it was. He'd have to go and take stuff in his car, go see a customer, fix something little up. And we'd often be at our Nana and Granddad's house. And so we'd often hop in the back of the car. It was a little Ford Falcon station wagon that had one of those special trailers with, and I just remember all those blue sticky dots.
Yep.
So they're like a little rubber sticker to basically stop the aluminium from smashing against the trailer. And like, I always just remember, that's what I remember about Granddad's car, is like the little blue dots, because they'd be everywhere. Like, they'd be on the back of the trailer where they're supposed to be, but there'd be a bunch of them that had just come off stuff and were in the back of the car. You'd pick them up and you'd play with them. And like, I just remember going on all these little things. And also we'd, go with him, do cool experiences as well, like down to the rugby and things like that. But I definitely remember just tagging along in the back of the car because, maybe Nana had my brother and sister with her or whatever. And so Granddad had to take one of them to kind of, help carry the load. I don't know, if Mum and Dad were with us or not on that day or what, but I just remember being, in back of Granddad's.
Yeah, nice.
White, I think pretty sure it was a white Falcon.
That's cool.
So, yeah.
I picked up on something you said there, like the letting kids see how things are done, like rather than be on your blocks, be on a iPad or a screen or doing an activity, like being, and we always, I think as parents, we love talking about having our children being engaged in their activities, as if we're really cool scientists / psychologists, and we actually know what we're talking about. We're doing a fine thing.
Or something
and
like that.
What I've discovered now is by not letting our kids or not letting people see the work that goes into building something, we're creating this culture of entitlement, because you go, well, that was easy. I didn't see the work go into that. You just see it appear. So if all you ever see is the finished product,
yeah,
you go, oh, here it is. And in my world, it's just appeared out of nowhere. I've been engaged in a task, and here it is. That's how the world works. And until we actually start showing people the work and going, the work is kind of boring. The work is tedious. the work can be really sucky. The results are great, but the work is something different. And I think learning how to enjoy those boring bits is kind of the key to not only athletic success, but success in life or parenting or anything.
Anything. Yeah. And I think that's one of the other parts. Like, I think we often think about having to like have, what is it? Like those big moments, like taking the child to the rugby game or going to the cinema or whatever it is, like actually going out and doing something. And that's, another one of those things that actually the everyday boring moments are actually some of the things, like if you probably think back to your childhood, it's not always going to be those grand things that you remember. Sure, there's going to be a number of those that will really stick out. Like, I have a moment, just because the Lions tests are on over in Australia at the moment. We went to one of the Lions matches with my dad back when I was, 14, 15, and got to see Dan Carter's breakout.
Yeah,
one of the best,
that would stick out. Yeah.
And so, that obviously sticks out. But a lot of stuff is just everyday moments, sitting around the dinner table, having conversations. And I think sometimes we almost take that stuff for granted. Like, you don't always have to make it a massive learning experience. As you talked about, just doing something with you is a learning experience. And I think we often forget that because these are things that to us are dull, mundane, repetitive, we don't realize that actually in the mind of a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, however many year old, sometimes this is the first time they've done that thing. Like, they've never been into, for example, a joinery before. So they've never seen guys working on a lathe or, aluminium windows being made. They've only seen windows in a house. Like for me growing up, that would have been one of the things that I, saw a bit of. And I got to go walk around the factory, do some sweeping and whatever it was to clean up. But that was an experience that I had. But, if it was going to be, well, Hayden's going to be so much slower, not vacuuming, sweeping the floor, let's just do it ourselves, but I kind of got to see that, and that's part of the process. But then also just doing everyday tasks, that's when you often get to have those conversations. When you're sitting in the back of the car with dad or with mum or whoever it might be, you actually get to have the conversations. And we often talk about, talking to our kids about meaningful things or whatever it might be, trying to have these meaningful conversations. Those often happen organically when you're just given time and given space and given a chance. It could be sitting on the couch, they're doing their thing, you're doing your thing, and you're just with them. And so they ask you a question, or you talk about something about your day or about something you've done. And so, I've tried as much as possible to be more present in those times because of that. So, it's not don't ever be on my phone, but it's, hey, if you can find ways that actually when you get home from work, after a day, don't pull it out until they've gone to bed. Find a way that you can kind of actually be present, because that everyday time is so important. And, I think it's the stuff you're going to look back on and really miss is coming home and just sitting on the couch, with your kid, or play fighting with the 4-year-old when he jumps on you, and kicks you in the arm. Like, all those moments are going to be the bits that they happen every single day for, like, hundreds of days on end. But by the same token, they're going to be probably the stuff that you miss more than taking them to a big rugby game, like, that's kind of the way that I look at it anyway, is the stuff. How can you find ways for yourself to be present in those moments? What are the distractions you might need to remove? What are some perspectives you might need to change? And, people have talked to me about, and I've done this myself before too, like when you come home, like have almost that time in the car as your time to process what's happened in your day, think through those things. But then when you walk through that door, your dad, like, you're no longer whatever your job title is, like your dad. And until, I always think of it like we only get what if you're working a full-time job, right, and you get home at say 4:30 to 5:30, maybe 6, the kids are in bed by 7 or 8. Like, you've literally got a couple of hours with them in the afternoon during the week, and maybe an hour or so with them in the morning during the week, while you're trying to do dinner, trying to do baths, trying to do all these things. And so you've got to be present for that, because it's so easy to miss an entire day, because you've decided that, hey, I'm tired today, I'm just going to pull out my phone for an hour and just chill. The kids are happy playing with whatever, and not go and engage in that. So it's easy to say that as well, right? Because you will be tired and you will be a bit exhausted, because that's life as a parent. But trying to find some ways, and it could be a specific hour that you put your phone away, you don't pull it out, you chuck it in your room when you get home until the kids have gone to bed, or whatever that distraction might be for you. It could be the TV. You just go sit down in front of the TV. Well, don't turn it on until an hour after being home, half an hour after being home. Give yourself the time to actually have that interaction and that meaningful time that is just every day, dull time, playing, whatever it might be. It might not look like anything at the moment, but actually that's how you form the bond. That's how you form the relationship. And that's how the kids kind of, trust you. You can talk to them, them. You can talk, who their kids' friends are at daycare, and you can actually ask them about specific names and were they there today? And some of that stuff, it sounds really obvious, but I think actually trying to make it happen and being intentional, and that's probably the word that I've come back to so much.
That's a great word.
Over the course of this entire podcasting process and parenthood, is just intentional. Like, it's not being perfect, but it's being intentional to try and be better and improve and be aware of how you're acting. Like, that's I think the really big key is, how can you be intentional in whatever it is that you're doing? I mean, that can apply to anything in life, right? How do you intentionally approach your job? How do you intentionally approach your training? Like, all of it, it's just, it's one of those real key things to think about, is actually, how are you approaching the thing? How are you doing the thing? Why are you doing that way? Is there a purpose? Like, all of that stuff comes down to, am I being intentional in my approach here? Or
I think you said it before. Am I reacting or responding? Yeah. It's easy to just react. And you can react for a week at a time and not know it. And then just go, oh, crap, where did that go? I've lost that. You mentioned, right.
It's where that self-reflection needs to come in, right? Like, having some sort of a process built into your week or your day where you actually just take a few minutes, look back and think, how did I go on that today? Okay, cool. I had a crappy day, and I had that conversation with my wife the other day. I was like, I've been grumpy this weekend, eh? She's like, yeah, you have. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to try and sort that out.
I'm thinking from growing up, I think 95% of the dads that I knew when I was a teenager were just permanently cranky. They were always grumpy. I'm like going, I think that's just a thing of fatherhood. Like, you're constantly slightly overworked, slightly undernourished, underslept. There's those things that just kind of creep up over 10 or 20 years. And then all of a sudden, you're just that grumpy guy that loves to react. And you're in a default setting. The work that you put into to not be that guy normally happens when your kids are 2, 3, 4 years old.
And it's. I think it's having that self-awareness as well, because that's part of the. And I think we're especially good at looking.
We're great at that.
What they're doing wrong. That whole looking at the speck in our brother's eye, missing the log in ours. Like that analogy. It's like there's so much truth to that. Like, because it's so easy to see when someone else is doing something that's not quite right, and even probably, to be fair, to talk like we're doing right now, right? We're talking and we could it sounds like we're amazing because we're
Yeah.
always being intentional, always thinking about these things. But it's like, actually, we can see all these areas where we might be able to be better, but it takes so much work to actually put in the reflection, the intent, being aware of it each day, to actually make it a reality. So, by all means, I don't
Yeah.
always get it right. Like I've talked to 65 people about how to be a good dad, and I'm sure some days Harvey and Toby would tell you, hey, he's not that great.
You mentioned Ryan Halliday before, the modern stoic. I really love his work. And one of the things I've learned, it might have been from Ryan or some other teacher, is the last time meditation. Have you come across that at all? So one of the
What's that one?
I'll use an
No.
example. Our youngest daughter, for years and years and years, we would wake up in the middle of the night and we'd find she'd crawled into bed with us. And she'd just kind of burrow in, sneak in. And man, she was doing this when she was like 8, 9, 10 years old still. She would still come in every now and then and we'll wake up and go, what are you doing in our bed? And she goes, I thought you might have missed me. It was never because she was lonely or she had a bad dream or anything. The stuff that kids normally say. She'd go, I just figured you guys would be missing me. And my wife's job is much harder than mine, and she works a fair bit more hours than I do, and so she's tired, and she doesn't want her sleep disturbed, and so we're talking about it and go, it's really frustrating how she wakes me up when she's coming in, and I reminded her that there's going to be a point at which that will be the last time she ever does that, because at 27, I doubt she's going to want to come and sleep with mum and dad anymore. And so at some point, she did it for the last time. So it was probably when she was 9 or 10 or somewhere around there. She just no longer do that. And they're all those little things that we used to get frustrated at tend to be the things that we miss when we're older. So being able to pause briefly, take a breath and go, how much more attention would I pay to this if I knew this was the last time? So if this was the last time I took my kids to the dump, would I pay a little bit more attention? How would my perspective, how would my intent change? What would I be focused on? What would be important this time? And I found that has been one of the greatest tools to not get angry at stuff and just stop wasting energy on things that were really not important.
Yeah. And you can also find ways, like you talked about there, like how, your wife's job is more busy or whatever than yours at that time. And it's like, well, there's probably a way that you can do it that actually she can still come to you and you can be the one that actually, gets up or wakes up or pulls her into bed or whatever it might be, puts her on your side so that she's not, kicking into mum. Is there a way that you can kind of go through that situation and be like, okay, cool, this is why it's not ideal, but these are actually the bits that would make it fine. And I also love that you said that she was saying, I thought you'd miss me, because that happened to me. Harvey typically comes to me at night time, and so we've slept in like another room a little bit because of, again, mum was getting up for baby and we didn't want to have everyone waking up. And I remember he didn't come in one night, and then he came in the morning, and I was like, I didn't see you in my bed last night. I whacked beside the bed to see if you were there. And he's like, did you miss me, Dad? I was like, actually, I did. Like, I'm so used to being able to like roll over in the morning and be like, g'day, Harvey, nice to see you. Have a little chat and a cuddle in the morning, and he wasn't there. I was like, I actually did, Harvey. So it's quite funny that your child would say the same thing as what he sort of picked up on when I was like, you didn't come to me.
Did
What's
you miss
going
me?
on?
Of course, I missed you. Anyway, let's take a little bit of a trip over to the work that you're doing now. What are you doing now? And what's, talk us through it.
So at the moment, the majority of my work is made up of coaching and consulting, is kind of how I term what I'm doing. So the coaching side is relatively self-explanatory. So that's working with, could be dads, could be athletes, could be, well, dads can be athletes. So, I'm working with athletes, some of whom are dads. And focus primarily around strength training, getting people stronger, as well as doing some conditioning stuff as well, because I think one of the big parts that I came to realize early on in my fatherhood journey was I need to look out for my own health and longevity. And if all I do is lift and I don't actually take, some time to do some cardio and take attention to some of the other aspects of my health,
Yeah.
that'll catch up with me in time. So I've been trying to kind of make that a bit of a priority, even while strength might be the focus, to try and find ways to build that in. And, might not be a whole bunch of that cardio stuff like it was when I was doing some half marathons and things, but at the moment strength is the focus. But it's also, don't let that completely slip off, because it's so much harder to get back into it. And that's probably one of the big things with parenthood and exercise in general, is it's really hard to pick it back up if you drop it. So if you can keep a real baseline and low level of your training throughout those hard seasons and those hard years, then you've still got that habit. And when you want to ramp it back up again, you're not going back to zero and square one and then trying to build capacity again. You're actually starting from a foundation that you can build from.
I always tell people, if you remain
coaching
consistent with your training, even if you're not training hard or whatever, but you maintain that routine of this time every day is for the purpose of getting stronger or fitter or whatever. But you just don't train hard during that time. When you're ready to train hard again, you don't have to relearn the skill of discipline. Because I find for most people, the first 3 months is just figuring out, how do I turn up again? And then you got to, you build that, and then 3 months after that, you actually work on the things that you want to work on.
Yeah, I had one of the guests early on. He said basically his key tip for dads was just don't stop. He's like, I don't care how much you do. I don't care if it's just getting out for like a 1K. He's a runner, so he's like, just a really short run. Doesn't matter. Just don't stop. Like, keep doing something during that time, especially during the hard times, because that habit, and building that discipline and having that as a consistent thing and just part of who you are and what you do, that's important. And I think oftentimes when we might have competed at a higher level or, taken it pretty seriously, it's really hard to do it on a low level and feel like you're still doing it. But it's so important, because you don't know when you might decide that you actually want to push it again. And it's so much harder to start again from zero than it is to start from 20% or 30% of what you were doing before. So the coaching, there's working with a handful of athletes there, and then also doing some consulting stuff. So that's kind of
the consulting. The consulting sounds interesting. I just like consulting in general, because it's like, what do you do? Well, people just pay me for my ideas. I'm a consultant.
Really knows what you mean.
Oh, okay. So you just come here and you give opinions. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Just.
So I've been doing a bunch of different things. There was a project I just wrapped up with a place called the Impact Collective, and kind of what they do is they go out kind of on behalf of public agencies. Really, that's where their funding has come from, and they will grab community voice around different topics, combine that with the actual, hard data that we have, and kind of actually paint a picture of, this is what the data says, this is what the people say, and these are the things that would make a difference. So it's kind of trying to piece those different bits and pieces together. And so I was involved with them doing a couple of literature reviews, so specifically around New Zealand focused literature on mental health, and then the other one was on housing, and particularly rental and emergency housing. So essentially just looking at the scientific literature on those topics, seeing what the main sort of themes are, pulling some quotes from those, and kind of telling a little bit of a story there. And then that basically went into a bigger report that had all the other insights from communities, insights from, providers, and all that sort of stuff to kind of paint the picture of these big issues. So they went through and did this first for communities, and then they basically came up with these big 5 areas. So I was only involved at the very late stages. Like, I can't claim a whole bunch of work. The literature review was basically me, and then I was kind of, I was done. But they had basically pulled together these big 5 community concerns that they had seen across, I think it was about 5 districts or 4 districts that they had done around the lower North Island here in New Zealand. And so there was family harm, there was mental health and well-being, housing, employment. What was the other one? Can't remember the other one. There was one more, but there were these 5 big concerns. And so then I came in and did the last, was involved in those last 2 pieces, basically to help them finish off what they were doing, because they've pretty much had some funding dry up. And so they wanted to finish off these reports and then, go on hiatus essentially. So yes, that was a cool one to be involved in. And then at the moment, I'm working on a couple of research projects, so sports science stuff, with one of the local universities here. And the other part that I've been doing in that is kind of miscellaneous stuff. So I write for Reps every month as well. So that's BioLane's research review. So each month I review a scientific paper in the exercise nutrition space and kind of, try and make those into applied and practical summaries so that people that may not be scientists can read this and get an idea of what is the literature
Oh
kind of saying on
man.
these topics, or what did the study find, and how can I apply that. So I'm doing that every month. I've got some other bits and pieces. I've been rewriting coaching manuals for a
Oh
sport
really?
that I've never
What
been
sport's
involved
that?
in. Like a whole bunch of different stuff has kind of
Boxing.
popped
Okay.
up. Boxing. So yeah. So I've never been involved in boxing. The one time I tried to be involved in boxing was at school, because at Palmy Boys we have, or they have, sorry, they have boxing still as part of their school like sports calendar, and people can volunteer to be involved. And I remember asking my dad, and he's like, "No, you can't do that."
Yeah. Good
He's like,
call,
"Your head's
Dad.
too
Good
important."
call.
I was like, "Okay." So yeah, that's kind of what the consulting's involved. So it hasn't been anything sort of specific. And then prior to that, my day job was in health. So I was in commissioning of health services up until November last year. I've done project work in various different parts, predominantly primary and community-based health providers, and kind of the like system side of that in the background, trying to actually make these things happen and, solve some of the challenges that there are in the public health, which are probably unsolvable, but potentially, they're still worth trying to make better where we can, because I think, it's such a valuable thing. And yeah, I only ended up in that really because I was in exercise and I knew someone in the health sector and they had a job going, and I thought that sounds quite interesting. And health is really, adjunct to exercise, right? They're two things that kind of go hand in hand. So then I ended up in health, and I was there for about 5 years, and probably, well, may end up there again, depending on what happens over the next couple of months.
Well, it's nice to know that people are trying to work on public health still. That's reassuring, because, like you said, that's,
Well, there's a lot of good people in the health system, and I think like a lot of it, not to get,
let's go deep. This is
too
my
deep
favorite
into
thing.
this stuff, but at least over in New Zealand, like at least over in New Zealand, like I think a lot of the issues kind of stem from the fact that you have two primary political parties. We only have a 3-year term in government, and like the way I see it, again, this is just my perspective, right? Is that people come in and they want to make some change in the 3 years that they've got, and so we have a really lot of short term stuff in health, and I think this is pretty endemic in a lot of our
Yeah.
government ways of operating and policy and all those sorts of things. Is like, yes, the government will typically get in for longer than 3 years, but the projects they do are often based around what impact can I make now. And like what I would love to see is like, the two major parties or whatever it is actually sit in a room and be like, okay,
Surely.
long term, we must want the same things in health. Like we want access, we want quality, we want it to be affordable. I don't think anyone's going to argue about some of those really big things of what we want. So let's get some experts in the room who aren't necessarily politically oriented. Let's talk to them as politicians and come up with a 10-year, 15-year, 20-year plan that regardless of who's in power, yes, there might be some trimmings around the edges of how things work, but the actual like strategy and focus could kind of be aligned. And I don't know if I'm living in fairyland thinking like that, but in my head, I've always thought, man, it would be great if we actually had like a 9 or 10-year plan. We pushed for something that was evidence based in terms of like we've seen it work overseas or seen it be able to work in a different or similar scenario, to New Zealand, and give it a try and actually stick with it for a period of time without just uprooting everything every 5 seconds and wasting money on restructures. Like that's yeah. I don't think anyone in New Zealand health system will listen to that or tell me off for that. And I think that's a pretty broad and vague description. And probably, I don't think too many people would disagree,
You would hope
regardless of which side of the
that you'd get
political spectrum they
bipartisan
fall
support
on.
for that.
You would hope that, but I don't know, man. It's really hard, and I think that's for me the biggest frustration. And I was in health prior to during the COVID response, and then after that, and so we've had a government change in that time as well. And so you've kind of seen some polar shifts, and also having been in education for the 8 years prior to that, you've seen the same thing when you've had government change, is like how the system shifts. So it's kind of an education and health experience for me, as seeing that it's not just my time in health. But I think it's probably some of the changes that were made in the health sector while I've been involved have been more substantive. than what I saw when I was in the education sector, because some massive change happened, but I'd left. So I probably would have had a similar perspective, even if I was still just teaching.
Yeah, I think what you're
I would have had a
describing is
similar thought
just a
process.
general sort of public servant kind of approach, or dealing with government at all. Like, I was involved with justice and education and health on and off for the last 25 years. And the bits that get me, they really get me, I get mad about it, is when we change government and you think, all right, the goal's still the goal. We want to increase access. We want to improve health. We want to have more kids coming to school. We want to, the basics. And instead of working on a plan for that, we rebadge from the Department of Justice to the Ministry of Justice. And we spend millions of dollars just changing one word on the logo. And I'm like, okay, so that was my introduction as a 21, 22-year-old, and became pretty cynical pretty quickly with the way government services work.
Well, and that's the thing, right? You end up, like, I see people that have been in health for 20 plus years, and I'm just like, man, how do you and that's often my question to them, how do you deal with that? Because it is such a thing, like, when you're so focused on wanting to get outcomes and wanting to try and improve service and make it more accessible and all of those good things, like, when something comes in that's just clearly not going to help push towards that goal, and as you say, it's like tinkering around the edges with what the logo looks like, to be a pretty blunt example, but it happens. It's like, well, like, yeah, how do you just keep coming back and trying to focus on that? And I think that's kind of the key if you're in those kind of departments and things mentally, is you still have to keep your focus where it is and realize that unfortunately some of it is out of your control, and I think that's probably the part that I have had frustrations with, is just dealing with that piece and realizing that, hey, you work for this organization, but you might not necessarily, that doesn't mean you have to agree with everything they do, right? Like, you might have a different perspective and you would probably provide different advice to whoever it is that's asking you for your opinion. But at the end of the day, you are still, an agent employed by them to implement whatever the decision is that is made. And I don't know, I found that quite hard at times. And I think if I end up back in there, it'll be more of a matter of trying to give my advice and my opinion, but being able to step back and say, okay, like, you've done your bit. This is the way that we're going, and this is what you're going to have to do. And, suck it up, princess type scenario to an extent, and do your job, because at the end of the day, it's your job and you're employed to do that. And you can give advice, and that's a good thing. Give your advice when you can. And if it's not, if your advice isn't considered the best advice, you have to be able to live with that. And I think that's what the people who are in those systems for a long, long period of time get really good at, right? But as you say, there is a bit of cynicism in there, and you do see a little bit of that. But by and large, everyone I've seen in those health systems wants better outcomes. They want better equity. They want results that are improving. And I think it's just the nature of the system, and it's a really complex beast. And from the outside, when you look in at one of these systems, you think you know the answers, and then you get in there and you think, well, if I tinker with that, that changes. If we tinker with this, that changes. If we it's like the argument of tax the wealthy, and you're like, people are like, but if you tax the wealthy, look what's happened overseas, they've left. And it's like, where is the simple answers here? And then that's why you realize, I think, that there isn't one answer and there isn't one right way to do it, and everything that you may choose to do will have trade-offs, and you might think it's the best way, and then it actually gets implemented and you realize there might have been some blind spots that you hadn't realized were there. So it's interesting, and I have enjoyed being in the system. And I think one of the things that I would say about both the health and education systems from my experiences is, like, everyone who I've ever met who's on the front line, by and large, 90, 99, probably almost 100% of those people, like, they really do actually care, and they really do actually want to make it better. And, like, my wife is a primary school teacher, and whenever you hear anyone bagging teachers, like, you can just see the frustration, because they'll say something that's just, some chump on talkback has said something, and it's actually wholly untrue as to what they've been doing in the system, but it's the way that it's perceived from the outside. And it's like, well, actually, we have been trying to do A, B, and C, and it's not as simple as that person has said on the radio, and this is why. And I mean, sometimes you have to make big changes and take big swings and do those sorts of things, but by and large as well, the people that are in there are just trying to do the best they can, and they're trying to make a difference in their kids' lives or in their patients' lives. And every experience I have had when I've gone into the health system pretty much, when it's been a personal interaction with someone in the system, for a health concern or for whatever it is, I can't complain about my experience in that. The only thing you probably could complain about is that the demand is high, and so therefore it's hard to get seen. Like, that's literally the problem. Once you're being seen, it's normally a very good experience, at least
I also,
what I have found.
with both health and education, I want to remind people that most people are trying to do a good job. Like, I know I posted a reel about, there's a funny stat that shows about 1 in 5 employees are anti their job. Like, they go to work to cause trouble. And it's true, those people exist, but they're squirreled away for the most part. They're not the majority.
They're not the majority.
They have provided some entertaining stories over the years. There's people that just want to kind of stick it to the boss or whatever. But I always tell people, most people are trying to be pretty good at their job. I don't think people wake up in the morning and going, I want to do a shit job today. I'm going to go to work and I'm just going to half-ass it, and I hope I make a lot of mistakes. Because I think people like to feel competent. It's just that level of competence is variable.
Yeah.
So the person, and so I think that's a really important perspective when dealing with anyone in education or health is, for the most part, you're right. They're doing it at the best of their ability. That's not saying their ability's always really high, but they're doing stuff at 100%. And I think if we can appreciate the effort people are putting in those, especially because they're human-facing services. We're never going to get it perfect. We're never going to be at our best at all times even. We can just hope to be kind of near our best most of the time and having a fairly positive intent towards a good outcome. And I think if we can play there, then things really do improve. When we start playing outside of those lines, I think that's where we just get talkback radio and social media debates.
And I also like that point of both of those systems are really complex, and there's a lot of moving parts, and there's a lot of historical stuff that's hard to change, and all of those sorts of things around processes, bureaucracy, like that exists. And then the other part about what you said, people are trying their best, and they're also trying their best in a strained system. And I think that's probably part of, especially here in New Zealand, at least. It's not like they're showing up and they've only got to see a couple of patients. It's bang, 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 bang all day, and so that's probably where a little bit of self-advocacy is really important in the health space as well. Like being a little bit proactive, making sure, like I had an appointment with my doctor a little while back, and I just remembered I needed some bloods done. So I just messaged him prior to the appointment and said, hey, would it be good to get those done this week before I come in? He's, oh yeah, that'd be great. And so, he's probably seeing,
they'll work an 8-hour day. They'll see on average 3 to 4 patients per hour for 8 hours. Yeah, 15-minute consults.
It's meant to be like 15 minutes or something. So so it's bang, 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 every day. So for them to think a week ahead about you would be almost impossible, right? Especially with the amount of paperwork and things I've also got to do every day. And so, sure, he would have sent me for those afterwards. But I'm like, I kind of want to have a conversation about that if anything came back, So, if there are little ways that you can be proactive as well, and even if it's thinking about kids and education, it's how can you be engaged in their education at home as well? What are some things you can be doing, to actually help them be engaged and involved and make them positive about school or about learning, or about their health, all of those sorts of things. There are things that you can do, and same thing for yourself, right? It's, there are things you can do to help improve your own health that you probably know and that are simple, and you try and overcomplicate, but really a lot of it is pretty basic stuff, but it's hard to do. And all of those things that we can do can help the system, right? But the system is under strain, and it is challenging.
Yes.
It's complex, mate. And I don't think we've ever talked about that on a podcast before, but there we are. It's been I think being in the system has been really insightful to seeing how things operate, and some of the complexity behind closed doors, even about things like contracts and how that operates and how you get, it's just stuff that, you turn up to your doctor and they see you and you don't have any, all the background stuff about how they get paid for your appointment or how much the clinic gets, all of that stuff, there's a whole big mess of that behind, because how do you fund a public system that is a bunch of private companies who are providing, in terms of the GP primary care side, there's got to be a mechanism for them to get the funding, and someone has to make that happen. It doesn't just appear in their account because you went and saw them, there's a whole bunch of systems and processes and computer programs and data collection and all of this stuff. It's pretty gnarly when you get into it.
So, and then I think as a population,
And that's just
I
primary
was
care,
going to
mate.
say
I don't even know what the hospital's
as
like. I've got
that's
no
just
idea.
for the GP or the primary care, as you say, and then as you get into a bigger system like hospitals, there's more people, more complexity, more layers, and you're just like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And then of course
Yeah.
that
Yeah. I have no idea how that funding model works or how anything happens there. Like literally wouldn't have the foggiest. I've never been involved in that side of it. So all of my experience is only
that's
primary and
where
community. So
going back to when I had the strokes and obviously, being misdiagnosed for so long and all those kind of things. And then even afterwards with the problems that I had with physicians and the medical community, people go, oh, so do you hate doctors now? And I go, nope, absolutely not. Doctors still helped me. Some of them helped me eventually. Some of them helped me indirectly in ways that now I'm a better person for having had the experience. But every single time I tell people, I said, I just got unlucky with some statistics. Because if you're going to pump that many people through in a week with a 15-minute consult, and that doctor, that individual has to be near perfect every time. And if they're getting 95% of things correct, think about that 5% error as that little filter bubble as you go through the system. That's a lot of people getting misdiagnosed every day when you're operating at 95% of your expertise. So if you get 19 out of 20 right, it means you get 1 out of 20 wrong.
And like the other part of that is, I remember one of the we had a few workshops and things with some of the GPs, for one of the issues that we were dealing with locally when I was at the primary health organisation here. And I remember one of them sharing some stories about that stuff, like the time that they got it wrong and the letter that they got from the patient's parent or whatever about that. And I can't even imagine living in a world where I get something wrong and the consequences.
Yeah.
You didn't do it on purpose. You were trying to do your best. You wanted to get it right. Like, as you say, you wanted to get it right. You want to get it right every time. And it might be 99%, but there's still that 1 in 100. And probably the 99 you got it right for, you don't even think about. But that 1 in 100, they have to deal with that over and over again because of the nature of what the consequence could sometimes be. And hopefully it's not too catastrophic every time, but every now and
just
again
a numbers
it will be
game.
right. And it must be rare. I can't even imagine what that would be like, having that level of like responsibility.
I don't want it. I'm glad. I'm never been interested in medicine. Never, just never.
My Nana always told me I should be a doctor, and I just said, look, Nana, I am. I've got a PhD, so I've done it, Nana. She's like,
they're just butchers. Medical doctors come. Let's talk about where doctors come from. All right, Dr. Pritchard. Let's talk about that then, because doctors named Pritchard seem to be overrepresented in Oceania powerlifting.
Well, I wasn't a doctor when I was initially in the Oceania powerlifting, though, so I
haven't
competed internationally as a doctor. No, I was doing my doctorate in 2014. I started, so my last international was that in Melbourne in 2014. Yeah, so I haven't done another international since that, and I started the PhD the start of that year and finished it in end of 2017. So so the Dr. Pritchard has never competed on the international stage, at least the one from the side of the ditch. Although,
like I keep reminding people, all the greatest Australians are Kiwis. If you ascend to a certain level of performance as somebody hailing from New Zealand, we'll just call you an Australian eventually.
Same thing with Australian musicians and our people over. We're used to it.
I struggle when we call Crowded House an Australian band. It's like 2 out of 3 were, but it's the Finns. It's those silly Finn brothers again. They're almost Australian. They're so good at what they do that they're almost Australian. Yeah, right. Must be.
They must be Australian. We're far too backwards a country here over across the ditch, mate. We've talked about the problems in our healthcare system and our education system.
We're going through the formal process of handing Russell Crowe back to you, though. Anyway, so PhD. what was the topic? And what am I trying to do here? I know a lot of people that that are at the postdoc level or they're considering PhDs, and I think there's a very romantic notion about what you actually do during a PhD. And so I want to give you the opportunity to kind of clear up what you did, what you thought you were going to do, and then what you've done with that information, because I think it'll change a few people's mind about what a PhD is and isn't.
It's quite funny. I had this conversation with one of my friends earlier this year because he was looking at doing his doctorate, and I was like, here are the reasons that you shouldn't do it, and here are the reasons that you should do it. Like, and then he's made a decision. He's going for it, so good on him. And I guess you sort of said, what did you think it was? I guess because I had been in academia a little bit afterwards, I kind of knew what it was because I had been observing my peers that had done postgraduate with me that were like, into or well into their PhD programs before I started mine. So I finished my honors in 2010 or 2011. So I kind of had 3 or 4 years out of university. Well, most of that was out of university. I had a couple of years in the real world, and then I was as a lab manager at Massey before I started lecturing at UCOL. And so I kind of had a bit of a perspective of what it involved, and I knew what it was. And so I wasn't too surprised, I guess. Probably the experience for me was the fact that I did mine remotely, and so I wasn't in an office able to walk up a hallway and talk to my main supervisors. So thankfully I had one of my supervisors here in Palmerston North, and so I could go down to his office and have a yarn, but he was at a different institute, so that wasn't, that might have been monthly or something like that, and I still have a really good relationship with him and support him on some research projects, so that's been a cool relationship. But yeah, I mean, essentially what you're trying to do is deep dive into one topic, understand what we know about that topic, and then try and answer a question.
What
specific question
let me add
topic.
something to that.
So, I mean,
one exceedingly specific question about one thing.
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky because mine was a little bit more broad, and because I got to do it in powerlifting. But I remember back to my honors graduation, and I just remember seeing the people walk across and getting these funny looking hats. The cowpat hats is what I later heard that they were called, because they literally look like a squash cow poo on your head, essentially.
Cowpat.
Being off a dairy farm growing up, the cowpat.
It really does.
I know what they look like, right? So it does look like a cow patty on your head. And so I saw that and I was like, man, that's cool. And then I remember them talking about some of the projects that people did. Like one of the guys, and this would have been 15 years ago when I graduated from my undergrad, and I still remember like them talking about it was like the genetic component of the color of flowers or something along those lines. So like what is it? It must have been like the genetic expression or something that causes flowers to change color or to be a certain color. I you can literally do these on anything. Like that was kind of my thought when I heard that. And so I remember talking to someone later about, the potential to do further research, because I was always really interested in the research side of things. And that's why I initially went on to do postgrad, because I enrolled in becoming a secondary teacher when I finished my degree, got approved for that. But then at the last minute decided, actually, I want to chase this honors thing, and there was just a piece of me that wanted to do further education, really, to be fair, was why I wanted to do that. I got that, went away for a few years, as I said, came back, and then I was lecturing at UCO, and I thought, well, part of our job here is actually to do research. Like we're expected as academics to be producing peer-reviewed research. So why would I not, pursue further research? And I'd done honors, got first class. So in New Zealand, at least, that gives you direct access into a PhD program if you wish to. And so I found a supervisor, Mike McGuigan, up in AUT. I'd gone up there for a couple of conferences, had a chat with him. Yeah, so he's done a bunch of stuff in power training.
So he was
brother, I don't know if you know Craig. Yeah, so
he was down south for a long time, wasn't he? He worked, not Craig, but
powerlifter.
Mark. He was working with Mike. Sorry, Valerie Villi. Is that right?
Mike. Yeah. Potentially, because he did some S&C coaching as well. So he's done a bunch of stuff in that strength and power space. He was over in the States for a while as well, I believe, working. When I met him, he was a professor at AUT, supervising a bunch of different students. And at the time, also Eric Helms was at AUT. So I knew Eric through powerlifting scenes. He had been doing his master's, I think, at AUT at the time. And then he enrolled in his PhD at about the same time as I did. And so I was talking to him about the experience at AUT. And I really wanted to work with Mike because I knew Mike had all this expertise and strength, that his family was involved in powerlifting, like those sorts of things I was aware. And so I thought, well, this would be cool because I'd love to look at something in powerlifting, but I didn't really know what. And so initially I was thinking about going down the weight cutting route because that always fascinated me. But I ended up going with tapering because it was an area that basically at the time there was essentially nothing about. And if you remember back to when I probably first started powerlifting back in the 2010, I think it was, one of the done things was pretty much just take a whole week off.
Yeah, I remember that.
That was my first common thing to do.
I hated it. I really like training. I want to be in the gym as much as I can.
Yeah. Yeah, and I always came in feeling like, that whole like greasing the groove type scenario. Like I felt like the movement didn't feel as good. It didn't feel, the groove didn't feel greased, I guess, is what I kind of thought. And so, there were different strategies and approaches being used, but there wasn't really anything evidence-based. So that was what my PhD involved. I essentially read a whole bunch of literature around strength training, so how people can get stronger. I read a whole bunch of literature around tapering. A lot of that was based, initially at least, the stuff I was reading was in endurance sports. There wasn't really much that was properly focused on that. There was like volume reduction stuff, but it wasn't necessarily, proper tapering or peaking for an event. So we sort of did some of the first studies in that, and my PhD involved 3 studies.
Right.
Having to think back now, man, it's been 8 years since I finished it. So the first one was interviews with New Zealand elite raw powerlifters. And so the idea there, so I published or had, in press a study that talked around what we know currently about tapering and peaking for strength sports. So focused around actual tapering as well as training cessation or just taking time off and seeing how that works. And then I jumped into the first study, which was sitting down and chatting with a bunch of different elite level powerlifters from New Zealand at the time. This was 2014. I wasn't allowed to talk to myself though.
So how did the conversation?
But I could talk to everyone else.
How did the conversation with Jono go? How hard was he to?
I can't remember if I did one with Jono. I must have though. But yeah, I mean, that one would have been more than 10 years ago that I did that study. So basically, I chatted to a bunch of people. It was kind of like, why do you taper? What do you do? And it was a really like semi-structured interview. So it wasn't sitting down with just a set list of like survey questions and going through those. It was like, okay, what do you do here? And then tell me about
So it was more bottoms up,
like,
kind of
data and
qualitative.
Yeah, like there were, I think, about 8 or so questions, and some of that we gathered quantitative information, like how many days off do you take for a meet? How many weeks is your taper? When do you have your peak training volume? All of those sorts of things that kind of were part of it. Because with the strength and conditioning journal, if you just throw them like qualitative stuff, they're not really going to like that very much. They kind of like to have some numbers. And if you're a reviewer in those journals, you're used to having some numbers. And that was my first taste of qualitative research and doing this sort of, thematic content analysis, which is funny because we've actually gone down that route with a few more studies. And we're working on one now, which is basically pulling together all of the surveys that me and a bunch of other researchers locally and nationally. So we've also got a guy over in Aussie, Justin. And so we're, throwing these things that we've done on weightlifters, powerlifters, strongmen, Highland Games, CrossFit, powerlifters, like all of these different strength sports athletes. And we're going to do a bit of a systematic review, see what else is out there outside of the stuff we've done as well, pull it all together and then actually tell a story. So that's something to probably keep an eye out for. I don't know when to be published. I'd say probably
that would be a fun one
at the latest. So we're about to start gathering that data. So that'll be pretty cool. But anyway, back to the PhD. So we had the interviews, figured out what people do. And then the idea really from that was let's try and test some of these theories about what's being done. And so we did a training cessation training study. So that was looking at around about 3 days off versus around about 5 days off and seeing if there was any difference. Pretty similar, both of those. There wasn't really any, neither of those timeframes was negative, but there were some positive things seen within that. So basically taking a couple of days off is probably a good thing to do prior to a competition. And with the caveat of it's all going to depend on what training you've done before. That was one of the things that I had with my studies was I think I don't know if I gave them a hard enough training that they really needed, a long period of time off or a long period of reduced training. So that's probably one thing when I look back. But then also I was targeting resistance trained but not powerlifters and basically making them do a powerlifting program. So, some give and take there. And then the last study that we did was actually comparing two different training programs with one another. So both of them had a large reduction in training volume, and it was either a slightly increased or slightly decreased training intensity. And we saw like both kind of got better after the taper. There were strength improvements, and there was a little bit of a hint of the higher intensity being slightly better. So one thing to put into perspective with that, though, is when we talk about training volume and training intensity in a training study like that, what we're actually talking about is your sets times reps times weight. So that would be your training volume, right? So if we reduce that by 70%, that could be from doing, say, 4 sets to doing 1 or 2 sets, and removing your accessory lifts, right? And the average intensity was also across sets. So if you were doing a heavier set, and then dropping back, if you remove a couple of those drop backs, naturally the intensity kind of rises. So it's not like we had you doing 90 and then jumped you up to 95 the week before. Your heaviest might have been slightly higher, but because the rest of the program changed as well, your average intensity that you were doing rose. So just to kind of put that in perspective, it's not like we made these guys lift a whole nother 5% the week of a meet, like it was probably more still like something around that kind of, opener level of weight during that week before. So those were the 3 studies that I did. And then obviously on top of that, there's all those other pieces of a PhD, mate, which is just, I always think back to the end of my PhD. So what I did was I wrote that tapering and peaking review. That was the first thing, submitted that for publication. So we did a thesis by publication. So that meant the thesis size overall was a bit smaller because everything was a journal article. So you couldn't blabber on. You had to keep it focused. So we did the peaking and tapering study. We did the elite powerlifter study. We did the training cessation training study. And then we did the actual taper training study. And we compared, I had all of those except the last one published by the end. But then at the front end of this journal, of this thesis, I needed something that actually said, how do you make people strong? Like, what is strength training? What do sets do? What do reps do? What does intensity do? Like all of these sorts of things. So during that last probably month, while I had finished all of those other bits, I had to go back and almost write a literature review at the end. And I took about a month off work at that stage. I can't remember if it was paid or unpaid, but I remember, there was one night there that my EndNote was breaking down. Like it just wouldn't do what I told it to do. And it started to pack a hoo-ha at me. And it would have been probably, I don't know, 11 o'clock at night or 10 o'clock at night, but I just had stuff I needed to get done. And so I vividly remember sitting there on the kitchen bench at home, like just so fed up. And I'm like, I'm going to have to go into work. I'm going to have to go into the office and work on this. And I remember trudging on down to my office at close to midnight it would have been, because I was in the groove and I needed to like get these words onto paper. And so I remember going into the office, like everything's dark, like every half an hour the lights are turning off and you're like, you're having to go back over, wave in front of the sensor so that the office light turns back on. And I just remember something just wasn't working. And I got so fed up. I just remember breaking down like in my office on my own at like 2 a.m. in the morning or whatever it was that I was trying to finish this thing. And like that for me kind of summarizes, the PhD experience. Like a lot of it is great. And like, I enjoyed what I was doing, but there are some parts where, like you spoke about earlier, you're just doing the thing and it's a grind and it's hard and you've got like, what you want to say, but you have to get the words out onto the paper and you have to put the referencing right and you have to make sure that the thing's working, and then your computer doesn't work and you've got to try and solve that problem. You've got to figure out how the heck you actually are meant to format a Word doc to have automatically updating table of contents and headings that look right and all of this stuff that you kind of it's not the stuff you necessarily love, but it's the stuff that's essential to doing a really good job of a thesis. And so like, I just always have these flashbacks to that whenever someone talks about a PhD. It's just that time that like I would have been I don't know, 10 pages worth of writing, if that, from the end of finishing this thing. And I just want to pack it in. I was like, I'm done with this. I can't do this anymore. And it's like having that internal conversation of like, yes, you feel this way, but you're so close. And like, you're not going to throw that 3.5 years of work, whatever it's been, away and just, abandon your PhD at the last minute. But by the same token, you're just like so fed up with it and so sick of reading about bloody strength training research again. And then the other part of that is that's been compounded because you're finishing stuff and then you're sending it to your supervisors, and they can make changes, and then so you have to look at it again and again and again. And like, thankfully I had supervisors who were extremely efficient at getting back to me. Like I would send them something, and Mike was amazing for this. Like, you'd literally send him something and within probably 24 hours he would have something back to you that had like good comments that were helpful and actually made, like, he was so effective and so efficient with that. Like, I can't fault that experience at all. And as I said, I wasn't in the office with him, so I couldn't go ask him about the thesis. He would send me back these track changes with some comments in an email. And like, yes, those things are sometimes hard because no one likes your work to be criticized, but you know that they're trying to do it to make it a better product, right? And so you're having this constant back and forth when you think you're done and then you got to change it and then you think you're done. It's like,
it's
thesis
final.
Final version 1, final version 2. And so like, I just remember, the good thing was, because we had done it by publication as well, it was a bit more robust because it had been through a peer review process before you actually went in front of your examiners. And that was the last part of the process, is after you've actually finished your thesis, you send it off, and then, after you've tried to forget about it for 2 months, you have to then go and defend it, when they come back to you with the comments. So that was another interesting experience. And one of the reviewers that came back for that was actually like one of the editors on the major journal in our the major textbook in our field. So I remember seeing their name come up as one of the reviewers. I was like, oh no, like if I've done a bad job, I'm going to be told about it. So, but she was lovely. She was lovely.
Because let's face it, most academics love telling you why you're
intimidating,
wrong.
Though.
Like it's like a
yeah. I was very thankful for that experience, that it wasn't like they tried to put me through the ringer just for the sake of putting me through the ringer. It was more of a actually trying to understand what you've done and why, and kind of like, after doing something for 3 years, you're so aware of the flaws. Like, know what your issues are. You know that your sample size sucks. You know that this sucks, and you're aware of every hole in it anyway. So anything they point out, you're like, oh yeah, like I remember and this is why we had to do it that way. And yep, it's not perfect, but what else were we to do living in Palmerston North with no one volunteering for my studies? Like, like you kind of knew, that they were good, and you also kind of knew the topic, and you knew all your own flaws. It's like someone coming up to you and talking about all your problems. You're like, yeah, I know most of these things. Like, thanks for pointing them out again. How can we make it better? And if they come to me with how to make it
come to me with the solution, I'm definitely going to listen. Like I only ever did honors in neuroscience. I didn't do a PhD. I don't think I ever will. Like, I watch just being in the lab with 5 PhD candidates, because we're all working on the same project. Like, it was end up being like a 10-year study that we were doing, and you just you go in and you just watch them over the course of the week and go, okay, who's going to crack this week? Where are the tears coming from? Who's throwing their laptop? Who's storming out in a huff? And it's just this.
Yeah. I was so close to throwing my laptop, mate. That time that I was talking about is so close.
The only time I've ever thought about smashing a laptop, like literally shut it down and just smack the crap out of it, was an EndNote problem.
Yeah.
I lost get this. It just, like, I lost a whole, like, I was really big on categorizing all my references. I like to be very, very organized with it all. I lost 2 sections that I'd categorized.
Yeah.
Like, they disappeared for about 8 hours. They came back. I don't know where they went. I don't know how they came back. But when I couldn't find them, I wanted to destroy things. And so, like, maybe with everything I've gone through, I won't put myself through another 3 years of this. I should do the relaxed, easy version.
And I guess that was the other part of your question as well. There was kind of like, the end product of doing the PhD, and like, I don't know. I think for me, almost a little bit like what we talked about at the start, right? With taking this punt and having a go at this coaching and stuff. Like, it might not have worked out exactly how I thought. With the PhD, like, it was always one of those things that I kind of wanted to do for myself. Like, I wanted to try and achieve this thing. Like, I've always been competitive. Like, that's just been part of my nature, hence my sporting background and things. But like, B, like I've always liked to try and test myself. And so doing the PhD was also almost more of a, like, can you do this thing? Can you stick to something for 3 years and actually knuckle down and make it happen? Because I think that's one of the most underestimated parts of probably any studying, right? Is actually, it's really hard to just keep doing something for 3 years or whatever it might be. Like an undergraduate degree is 3 or 4 years. So, like, I think that demonstrates some sort of resilience and some sort of stickability. And you learn through those experiences where things don't work out and where you're having to do the mundane, boring stuff, we're having to sort out reference lists, all of this stuff that you have to do in order to finish an assignment or whatever it might be. And you have to do that over and over and over again, right? So, like, that was one of the reasons I did it. I kind of did foresee myself working at a university as an academic, teaching sports science. And obviously I was doing that until 2020 at UCOL here in Palmerston North. But that was a polytechnic institution, and so they didn't really. How do I word that? Annoying people in health.
Let's just get everyone in this.
Like I don't think they really valued. They didn't really value the PhD, and they didn't really enable me to do more research. So I remember when I finished my PhD, like, you know, I'd had all these outputs and it made the institute look good because there weren't many people in our department that were having a lot of research outputs. And like, I was doing that for me and for my PhD and for my research. And I'm super, super thankful that they allowed me to, you know, if I had downtime, I could jump in and do research. Like I wouldn't have got through it as fast as I did if my job didn't literally allow that. So I'm so thankful that they did that. But by the end of it, I'm like, look, if you want me to keep doing this, like I'm not going to be doing this in my own time now. Like I'm not going to go and be doing publications, you know, outside of my allotted hours. Well, I probably would because I enjoyed it, right? But like, you know, is there some way that you can support me, maybe put my teaching load down a little bit so I can actually continue to be productive in research? Like you've got all this evidence that I can produce outputs. What do you think? And it was pretty much, oh, we don't do that. And so then I was like, in my head, I thought, okay, well, that's cool. Like I can understand that. Like I get it because that could be seen as unfair. But then I'm also like, you've really got the evidence of all my outputs and the fact I got a rating in the research, you know, performance-based research funding. So they were getting money in for the research I was doing. Like I knew how that system kind of worked because we went through the PBRF rounds near the end of my research. And so I was like, surely, like, there's some money there that can free me up a little bit, like, surely. But it was kind of like, no, we don't do that. And then also, like, we're having a little bit of loss of staff and things. So I think the teaching load kind of had to be higher to enable that. So looking back, I'm like, I can see why they made the decision. But by the same token, that was then my like, oh, well, I think I'm going to have a look at what other sort of stuff I might be able to do. Like, I've got all this research, analytical, critical thinking, like logical, process-based mind. Like I can take that and I can apply that somewhere else. And probably that's one of the biggest lessons I guess I've learned in the last 5 years about myself, and probably why I could take this risk and, you know, not be too scared that I'm going to end up, you know, on the bones of my bum. I say that, you know, knowing that I haven't actually got a job yet, Nathan. So I could still have that happen.
I'll give you.
But like, you know, I've gone through this experience of looking at my skills and saying, okay, I saw myself for that 8 years or whatever it was as I'm an academic. So what jobs did I look for on Seek? Only other academic jobs. Are there many of those in New Zealand? No. Are there many of those in Palmerston North? Heck no. So like, it was one of those things where I was like, well, I'm either going to hang around at UCOL for the next 10, 15 years, like get frustrated with the system and not being able to have the freedom that I want or the autonomy that I want, or I could go and try something else and see some of the other stuff I can do and learn something new, you know, like, and learning the health system obviously is something that I jumped straight into when I got my next job. And so it's like, yeah, that was quite an interesting time because you've spent all this time diving into that. And then you've kind of, you know, 3 or 4 years after your PhD, like, so I'm working in health with a PhD in exercise science, not doing anything with this thing that I spent like, you know, 8 years studying. And so it's a real shift in your thought process. And I think even to this day, like that's one of the things, like I've obviously tried to break back into that a little bit with doing more coaching, with trying to do more research in this field. But like, I don't know. I think I'm at a little bit of a crossroads in terms of what happens next. In terms of whether I continue to try and keep doing that or whether I actually say, right, I'm just going to be bloody good in the health sector or wherever I end up next, you know, and put all my eggs in that basket. But,
I got a few questions. Yeah,
There's still some
some
side
I
hustle
got
stuff,
some
Nathan, that I
questions
want to do.
around
Like
that.
that's the
But
thing.
if you don't mind, do you mind if we just take
Go for it.
a quick little break? Cool. All right.
Yeah, mate. I need to refill my
Give me a
drink.
minute. And we're back. I think I didn't make the same mistake I did the other day with Matt McKay and just not record the second half. So I trust that this is recording now. And I know you've got to go soon. So I want to get something semi-concrete because I'm aware that most people listening to this, they like training. They're powerlifters or strength athletes or rugby players of some shape or form. And I'm going to throw it out there now as you're the peaking guy. You're the tapering guy in powerlifting. You get referenced by all these superstars like Mike Teixeira and say, yep, this is the guy that we need to listen to. I've always learned things quickest by identifying what are the three biggest mistakes people make with tapering. So from your research and your interviews, what would you be able to identify if you, and so I always figure if I just avoid the three biggest mistakes for 6 months, I'm going to be ahead of 95% of the game.
Yeah, yeah. I would say there's probably the first one. I think is probably a pretty obvious one for a lot of people is doing too much. Like, so you know how you get itchy feet, and you're like, can I still lift that? And your training starts to cut. You know, you might be doing something in training, and you haven't actually gone near the numbers you think you might hit in competition, and so you feel like you have to try and hit that, or you're training a couple of days out, and you're like, oh, I'm gonna, I need to do a few more sets just to make sure, like, and so you don't trust your process that your coach or you might have come up with when you've looked at it with a fresh mind, not in the context of I'm currently in meet week and a little bit nervous and a little bit unsure what's going to happen, and you've come up with a good solid plan that's based on that should work, but then you get into that moment and you actually don't pull enough back. So doing too much. That could also though go probably further back in terms of into the training cycle itself, like training just too hard in the lead up to competition. So rather than necessarily having your volume at its peak, say 5 weeks out or something like that, trying to bring that too close to the meet. So you're just trying to train too hard all the way up and you're not actually giving yourself that space to recover. So that would be one thing, like doing too much. And then potentially also the opposite of that is probably going to be a second mistake is probably doing too little. And we spoke a little bit about that. Don't know if we were on or
I
off.
never know anymore.
The air at the
There's
time.
just all these red buttons on my display, and I press them
But we
every now
spoke
and
about
then.
that whole that whole theory of like, when we first started, it was just take the week off. And so probably doing too little and not feeling ready when you get to the meet day, or things feeling a little bit gunky or not quite right because you haven't done anything in the week of competition. And that was a really common approach prior to when I first got into powerlifting. That was a pretty common approach that you would see people do, and it kind of has evolved a lot since then. So those are probably the two biggest ones: doing too much, doing too little. So you kind of got to do like the right amount. And I'll quickly talk a little bit about the science there. But basically, it's anywhere from kind of like a 30 to 70% volume reduction is considered within the range. So pretty broad, right? And then the intensity is either maintained, or slightly altered either way, up or down. Again, thinking back in what we spoke about earlier about like an average intensity. So that doesn't mean you're bumping up your top set by 5% and, doing a 1RM the week of the comp. But you might keep it relatively, relatively intense or relatively high, 85, 90% ish, could still be done within that time frame, and it's probably good to do within that time frame. So those would be the two biggest things. But a big volume reduction should be the focus, and then the intensity. Don't go back to doing next to nothing. And I remember back we were in the training hall at Worlds in 2014 with Brett Gibbs, and I remember he did something that I hadn't seen before, and it was like I think it was only a handful of days out, and he did quite a heavy bench press. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I remember asking him about it, and then saying, okay, so like, it might have been 2 or 3 days out and he did a relatively heavy bench. It might have been pretty close to his opener. And I thought that was super heavy compared to what I was doing. I was going and doing like a couple of reps at 100 or something like that, just to move. But here he was going relatively heavy a few days out. And then the other example I have from this is 2013 Worlds. And again, we're going into anecdote here, right? Which isn't necessarily where we should be going. But, Jezza from Nauru, I remember we were on the second story in the training hall in 2013 Worlds, and there were, me and John had gone up there to do some, don't know what we're doing, just some lightish stuff. And then Jezza's loading up like 300 and something kilos for a front squat. And like, he's a couple of days out from competition, like, and whatever it was that he had done before he slapped on another plate, like, it wasn't easy. Like, he had to work pretty hard for it. Slaps on another plate, like, pretty much maxes out his front squat. And the funniest thing was none of the other Nauru boys were even interested. Like, they just left him to his front squat. It's like, man, you drop it, you drop it. Like, it is what it is. And I'm like, we're on the blooming second story here of a training hall in Russia. Like, you probably don't want to break anything. And so, yeah, that was another experience where I saw someone lifting relatively heavy, and it kind of just challenged my assumptions that I had at the time around like, okay, the week of the meet, we should be doing really light stuff, just moving through. It shouldn't be that hard. And then I think about the fitness fatigue paradigm, right? And, you do a training session and you have the after effects, which are fatigue, which basically cause you to have a decrement in your ability to perform. And you have the fitness after effects, which are like those positive adaptations that come after training, better neuromuscular, activation, muscle mass growth, all of those sorts of things. And really the aim of a taper, because the fatigue after effects take a while to dissipate. Like they dissipate quite quickly. So you have this training session, you have the fatigue high, and within a few days, you can probably lift pretty heavy again, right? It's not that big a deal. But your fitness after effects take quite a long time before they plateau and taper off. And so really what we're trying to do with the taper is try and minimize any of those fatigue after effects that we're having from training, and make sure that we can actually keep hold of those fitness adaptations that we've got. And so the beauty of it is that fatigue disappears faster than fitness. So therefore, just resting works, right? Because you lose some fatigue and your fitness can kind of hang around. So you can still express that strength. But I think that whole like specificity piece of we're training for maximal strength, so therefore it should be relatively heavy, still near competition. And then the other part that goes along with that is any powerlifter is probably going to tell you that 10 by 10 is harder than 1 by 1.
Yeah.
Like in terms of how you feel the next few days afterwards. Like if you did a 10 by 10, you're not going to go very well, right? But if you built to a heavy single, and heavy, I'm not meaning maximal, okay? Like if you built to 85, 90% do 1, it's a pretty smooth rep, right? Like RPE, 7, 8 max maybe. So it's not easy, but it's not hard. And so you can kind of do that and not get a whole lot of fatigue from it. And that's kind of a lot of what my thinking has gone to. And obviously I'm speaking in the context of a guy who weighed, 93 kilos, was only squatting 270 and deadlifting 290 or something like that. So I'm sure that this changes a little bit as people get way more trained, right? And people are, deadlifting 400 plus. Like I'm pretty sure it looks a little bit different, but I think the principles will still remain that something relatively heavy should be done.
The third mistake you see, the third mistake people made or make all the time with tapering. Yeah,
I'd probably say changing too much. Like your taper week looks completely different to any other week of training that you do. And there is like you can do that and it can work. But I think sometimes we change so much, we get rid of like all accessory work, all everything that we've been doing. And then you turn up on meet day and your body's like, well, I haven't been having this thing that I've been used to doing. You've removed it all from me. And so that's probably one thing I've changed in the way that I taper is I will still like probably even back during my PhD studies, I would have said, remove all accessory work, like don't do any junk volume, doesn't matter. Now, and part of this probably comes from the RTS philosophy around tapering as well. I would probably say, like, keep some of that in, but keep it at a low dose. So still have some of your main accessory lifts that you actually do, but maybe rather than doing 3 sets, just do 1. Like, still get the exposure to that thing, but, don't fatigue yourself by doing too much of that thing. So that your body's still like, yep, I know what we're doing here. And then the other thing that this is probably going too far now, but like,
dude, thank you. Thank you so much for saying that. Thank you so much.
And you're
Yeah.
just doing your normal training routine, right? And then you taper for a meet and you have a rubbish day because you've made all of these changes. It's completely unfamiliar. Some of that comes down to the environment, probably, of being in a meet and all those sorts of things. Like, some people respond well to that and some people don't respond as well to that. But that would probably
Yep.
be my other thing, is like, sometimes you don't have to taper. And especially in the case when we think about traditional tapers, often it's followed a period of like an overload of training, which we spoke about with my
Yeah.
training studies, right? Is I don't know if I necessarily gave enough for people to have to do a really drastic taper. And in my training studies, we were only doing like 4 weeks of training with a 1 week taper. So you can imagine, if you've done like a 16-week block, your taper might not actually just look like the last week. It might actually look like kind of how your block has looked, that 4 weeks before might actually look quite different to your 18 weeks prior to that of training, or whatever it might be. So sometimes, like, whatever you're doing in those last few weeks of training, and if it's stuff like, Mike Teixeira talks about the greatest hits, like the stuff that works, you can come back to and you can play the greatest hits, and then that normally leads into a pretty predictable outcome on meet day. I think there are some different approaches that don't necessarily follow the scientific approach, but actually work really well. And I remember when we were interviewing, can't remember what it was for. It might have been for one of the powerlifting studies I did with Kyle Travis from the States. And I sent the survey out to some of the lifters to like just give us feedback on before we actually sent it out more widely, just to make sure it was actually, asking the right questions. And someone came back and said, you don't have an option for if I don't taper. like, you don't have an option for the taper just being like, make no change type scenario. And so we had to go back through and sort of add in some questions that made sure that we're actually capturing that response, where actually all they do is train as normal and take 2 days off. So that's another valid approach, right? Is actually train pretty normally. And that's probably closer to what I do now, but I would still be reducing volume. So my training, probably especially leading up to 7 days out, would look pretty normal, pretty consistent. And then that week of might look quite different to the week before, but I'm keeping elements of familiarity in there, elements of the things that I know work well for them, but not enough to fatigue them, but enough that we still actually can carry that fitness through and, hopefully have a meet day. And then the other thing is, mate, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Like, if someone has a really predictable tapering thing and they always get a few
Keep
extra
doing
percentage
it.
versus what they do in training, keep replaying that, go. And if it doesn't work, then change it. Like, sure, we could tinker with it, and the time to do that would be like at a local meet or something like that. You might try a different approach and see how it works. But if you're going up to a big meet, an important meet for you, whether that be a nationals, whether that be a regionals, an international, whatever it is, if the thing's important to you, you kind of need to know what's being done before. And so one of the things we kept coming back to in the research is the importance of keeping good records of training, what you're doing, what's working, because you are an individual and you will respond potentially differently to the averages. So monitor what you do, look at what works, trust yourself, test and retest, test at those smaller meets that might not matter as much, or test in like a gym testing environment. But, if it works really well, then apply that at a bigger one. And if you've got something that works that you can keep going back to, don't change because I told you that you should take X number of percentage off or do something funny with your accessories. Like, do the thing that has worked for you in the past because you can trust it and you can be confident. And I think mental, confidence going into a meet is super, super important. And if you're changing things and then second guessing yourself because of it, it's
Yeah,
probably
I'm
not
a
going to
big
lead to
one
the
on
rest of
that.
the
It
track.
was, I've seen some weird tapers and peaks from a couple of world champions, and they're literally doing it because it's what they've always done. I go, why do you do it that way? Well, I did it at my first meet. It worked really well, so I've just done it for the next 50. I'm like, oh, okay, you've got 4 world titles, so who am I to argue? Um,
Yeah,
I'm not saying
exactly.
it's yeah.
I actually reviewed an article for Reps this month, and it was a study that looked at progressing training based on adding repetitions or adding intensity. So, weekly you would either be doing more reps at the same absolute load. So they all started at like 80% and did, I think it was between 9 and 12 reps at 80%. It was to failure, just leg extensions and untrained people. So just bear that in mind. But there were the 2 different progression options. And basically they found that there were people that responded better to the increasing in intensity. And there were people that responded to the better by
Yeah.
increasing the repetitions in terms of muscle hypertrophies. But this could apply for anything, right? So like that's another thing, right? Like 12 people responded really well to, I think it was 12, responded like really well to the adding repetitions. and I think it was like 7 or something responded really well to the increasing intensity. So they had like a 2 times the typical error better response to that than the other one. So, a bit of an outlier. And so 7 of them were that, 12 of them were that. There were, I think it was like another 12 or 15 or something that responded equally well to both. And then there were 5 that didn't respond at all. So you kind of look at this and you're like, here's 37 people. We've got roughly a third of them that did this, a third of them that did this. And then, the other 2 were kind of in either no response or better to one of the other ones. So it's like, that to me just exemplifies like, monitor what you do, see what leads to progress for you, start with what is shown to work or, shown to work in the literature, but then make adjustments, because you might be one of those people that responds better to it being done a slightly different way. And cool, start with what we know works, but experiment every now and again. Try something a little bit different to what you think you should do and see if you might be someone who responds better to that, because sometimes it happens. But start with the tried and true and then branch out after that. So yeah, start with what we say you should do in the literature and then make changes after that. And
one of my favorite quotes of all time is from the artist Picasso, who says, and I think it's really apt here, learn the rules like a professional so you can break them like an artist. So learn all the rules about taper and peaking and all that, and then just artfully break it for the rest of your life. So then it becomes beautifully yours. Yeah, right?
Unless you find that thing
hopefully
works.
That's the way we find stuff that works.
But one day it won't work, probably. Right? One day it won't work. Like, shit, didn't work that time. And probably just the other caveat to add there, Nathan, as well, would be like, I think what you're doing prior to the taper is also super important. Like, and so whilst we might have these principles that say reduce by X, there's a reason there's big ranges and there's a reason there's different approaches. And some of that will come to, if you've been training really, really hard, you might just need some time off. Or if you've been feeling really beat up because life stress has been high, you might need to actually take away a bit more volume this time. And so just taking into account some of those individual factors, whether that be previous training, what's going on in life, all of those other aspects, because I think sometimes, you do have to tinker just because of what has been going on for you recently.
Really good point. And looking at the time, we've gone much longer than I thought we'd been talking for. Always happens. I love that. Let's wind it up with what type of people are you training at the moment, and how can they find you?
Yes, I'm just training anyone who wants to get stronger in a way that works for them, really. And that's probably the biggest thing, is it's about the individualization, because obviously with the Stronger Dads thing, a lot of it is people that are time poor, right? And they still want to train in a way that's effective and can help them progress. But equally, there are people that just want to get their strongest, and don't have those same sort of constraints. So, I'll work with anyone in that regard who has, a goal focused around strength. And that doesn't have to be a powerlifter. If you want to get stronger because you want to feel stronger, fitter, healthier, be able to play with the kids more, equally as keen to work with those people as I am with people that want to actually jump on a competition platform. Best place to find me is just Instagram, so at HJP Method. At the moment, I'm kind of like keeping the books around about where they are, so fire me a message if you're interested, and I, definitely happy to chat. And if I've got a bit of a spot at the moment, depending on what life's throwing at me, I will.
Oh, that sounds good, man. I really appreciate the chat. Always fun catching up. I can't believe it's you ran a podcast for 3 years now, and I think I was on 2.5. So it must have been 2.5 or 2 years ago since we spoke last. So let's not leak. Let's try and do it a little bit sooner next time.
Be pretty close to that, man.
Maybe we got Oceanias this year in Christchurch, I believe.
I probably won't be there, but
listen, I don't lift. I barely referee. I sometimes coach. I just go for the yarns now. Like, it's
you just go for real,
especially with the internationals. Breakfast and then the afternoon session in the hotel lobby. Always the best. It's like a couple of beer. That's I realize now that's why I liked going to those big events. I thought I was going because I wanted to be a world champion. I wanted to bench all the weight in the world, and then take that away. I'm like going, nah, man, I just want to have a cup of coffee with some weird Norwegian guy while he tells me a story. All right, man. Thanks very much, and we'll talk to you soon.
No worries, mate. Catch you later.